Welcome to the Rolle With Steve podcast. Talk to me from your experience about the hidden costs that you never see coming, that you have to plan ahead for.
You're not going to be successful if you're stressed about money, if you're stressed about your mortgage, your rent, putting food on the table.
See, I've learned in life, doesn't matter how much money your parents had and where you grew up and what kind of car you drove, you get to determine your own future. So on this podcast, I interview people who bet on themselves and change their lives. Nobody makes a $10 million or more exit without screwing some people over. Agree or disagree?
You know?
Most businesses don't fail because the founder wasn't motivated. They fail because the founder was wrong about something really important. They were either wrong about the product, the margin, distribution, or customer acquisition. So in today's podcast, we're going to talk about the obvious mistakes that founders make before they know better and how to avoid them before they cost you real money or your business. Today, I'm sitting down with Brian Lee. Brian's a two-time exited founder, the co-founder of Gilder, co-founder of Rolle, and one of the founders behind Lock Chicago Escape Rooms. Super interesting. What I love about Brian's story is that his first founder story was not some abstract tech company. It was a physical business with a brick and mortar location that had rent to pay and in-person customers. So over the next 30 minutes, you'll learn the most obvious mistakes founders make before they know better and how to avoid them before they cost your business. Brian Lee, welcome to Rolle With Steve.
Hey, appreciate it, Steve. Definitely lots of fun failures and learnings along the way. So happy to share them and excited to be here.
It's great to have you here. You know, people that follow this podcast or follow me know I talk about four things. I talk about product, I talk about margin, talk about distribution, and profitable customer acquisition, especially on that first sale. And it's because I've seen so many businesses fail because of one of those elements. I always talk about building an engine around each one of those. As you think back on your experience and now working with so many other founders, which of those four, product, margin, distribution, or customer acquisition, do people tend to make the most mistakes in?
You know, that's a great question. And I think, at some point during the conversation, I've got one more to add, I think that we'll kind of touch on. But I think definitely product is typically, and not even that they built the wrong thing, although that's a big piece of it. It's that a lot of the assumptions that founders make and the why behind they go into it. Sometimes it's, financial freedom, which we know founders don't really get to a point if they're lucky until years down the line. Sometimes it's freedom of time, when in reality founders are working way more, right, than they do as they did in maybe a corporate job. And sometimes, which most, it's to solve a problem or something that they've seen themselves, friends, family, coworkers, and they want to address it. And so of those four you mentioned, product typically, at least from what I see, both from my own journey and working with founders, is because they have this assumption that, hey, this is a problem for me or my coworker. It must be a problem that everyone else has. And then they conduct these product interviews. Maybe if they're lucky, they'll do 30, 40, 50, maybe 100. But they tend to try to use those to validate their thesis or what actually the problem was. When in reality, it's already so hard to get people to download a free app, right, or go to a free site. Then you have to get them to pay something and to pay and then use it so they don't churn. So there's so many ways that building a product can go wrong, and building the wrong thing, but building something that's truly a need to have versus a nice to have. That's typically where I've faced a lot of problems myself, and that I see a lot of founders currently face as well.
I want to dig into that a little bit. I saw a reel this morning where a guy was going on a rant talking about everyone can vibe code now. Everybody can make these awesome products. He goes, is anyone actually getting downloads on these products that they're making? Or are we just making all of this stuff? Like, maybe making the product was never the hard part. You talked about on LinkedIn in depth the confusion between nice to have and need to have when it comes to a product. What do you mean by that?
And it's exactly that. So much from, I do a little bit of angel investing still, but in talking with a lot of VCs and a lot of the questions that come up nowadays with this vibe coding and how much more inexpensive it is now to build an app or build anything than it was even 4 or 5 years ago. But the issue becomes, what does that defensibility mode look like? And with that, in the past, okay, a lot of it was the code, whether it was like some proprietary algorithm or whatever that may be. But now if you want to build, a social media-esque app like a TikTok, it's not so impossible to build versions of like that for much less than a few years ago. And so kind of going back from the nice to have to a need to have, there's a lot of nice to haves out there, and there's apps. If anyone probably checks their phone now, you probably have a lot of nice to have apps on your phone that were free, that maybe you use once or twice. But really, the need to have is something that, and there's a really good quote that I kind of talk about from one of the founders of Union Ventures, and the idea is that product market fit is just having something. It's nothing like this super abstract concept. It's just having something that's so good, people are willing to pay you and use you over the alternatives. And at the end of the day, having a need to have is something that, whether you do it for, maybe it's a fitness app for your personal life, maybe it is, a product board that you do for corporate or what you do as a founder, it's just something that you truly cannot live without. I look at Uber, Lyft as an example. Like, yes, what are the alternatives? You can take public transportation, you can take a cab, you can walk, right, in some circumstances. But the craziest thing, I think the stat about Uber was that typically once someone did 2 rides, it was 2 or 3 rides, they become a customer for life. Sometimes you use it once and you're like, it's not for me, I'm just going to go back to the alternative. But to me, that, even though it's really, there are alternatives, that is a need to have for a lot of people. So that to me is kind of what sticks. That's just one use case, but certainly there are plenty others.
Well, it's interesting because I think a lot of people, they see the sexiness of the venture capital world and these startups where someone's coming up with an entirely new idea that didn't exist before. And I always tell them, like, you're going to have to educate the market on that. Like, that's going to cost you something to educate that market. Can you afford to not be profitable for 7 years? Do you have access to funding? Now, you've done that because part of your story is seeing these escape rooms overseas, right? And then coming back and starting one here where no one knew what an escape room was. Talk to me about that context of the product, knowing that I got to educate everyone on what this is.
Yeah, 100%. And so for us, it was, we had done, myself and my best friend and co-founder. This was back, well, before we became co-founders, but back in, I believe it was 2013 or 2014, we went out to Japan, and that's where we saw and did an escape room, even though we didn't speak a lick of Japanese or really fully understood it. It was just a blast to do it. And to that point is, when we came back, there's always, everyone talks about kind of like that blue ocean strategy. And sometimes it's like, it's great when you talk to a founder and they're like, we're the only person doing this, like this is so innovative. And at the end of the day, there's 7 billion people on this earth. Not everyone's an entrepreneur, of course, but like, is there a reason you're the only person doing this? Is it because there's not as strong of a need for it, or there's not as big enough a market for it? How much, to your point, do you have to educate your clientele to let them, is this actually a problem where they're like knocking down your door trying to give you money, right, to solve their problems? Or is there something where you're trying to manufacture this problem that maybe people aren't willing to pay for, or doesn't exist at that level? And so tying back to the escape rooms, where I argue is like, of course, right, a lot of these things, escape rooms, no one needs to do an escape room in the traditional sense. But what we saw was that the shift, and especially now over a decade later, so much of experiences and things have shifted in how people spend their money to experiential retail and entertainment. It's about, being able to spend time and do things with loved ones and family and coworkers, instead of just, which, don't get me wrong, I go to plenty of dinners and love that, versus just a dinner happy hour or something else. And so for us was definitely a big point when a lot of people thought escape rooms were like panic rooms, or like, you lock them in and it's where you go if someone breaks into your home. But I think at the end of the day, the education piece is very easy if it is something that people want. If you find that the education piece and trying to help, it's like, I almost think, explain it to your grandmother, explain it to your grandparents. They're not going to get everything, but at the end of the idea, if it kind of makes sense, then you know that it's something that you can be explained, or the problem potentially exists. So that was kind of what we saw when we were first kind of launching and bringing it here.
We'll come back to that when we talk about customer acquisition in a couple of minutes. Before we do, I want to move on and talk about profit margin. Quick pause. I also want to invite you to go to steverolle.com. You can get a copy of my book, The Future You Choose. I wrote the book that I could have used when I was a high school student that didn't have direction, when I was starting my business and didn't know what to do next, how to expand my vision to be more than others expected of me, more than I expected of me. Let's get back to the show. The word profit indicates that a customer is willing to pay you what something is worth, plus a little bit extra, the profit. Otherwise, there is no profit margin.
Sure.
So what are the obvious mistakes that founders make that kill their profit margin and can kill their business, where they're not thinking about it the right way from the get-go?
Great question, and it's something that that's near and dear to my heart because it's something that I face. And a lot of times, founders very often think that, hey, like the best way to get customers is we have to be the best price, the cheapest price, and they tend to undervalue their product just to get in the hands of people. And I'm not saying that you need to overcharge or that, but at the end of the day, like even with Roamly, our first, when we shifted initially from consumer facing, where we had gotten a lot of traction, but effectively zero revenue because we hadn't quite figured out how to monetize the consumer side. But when we initially launched our SaaS side of it, it was like, hey, like we're kind of new to the space. Like we want to get it in as many people's hands as possible. Let's just make it, super cheap and affordable. And the problem is that a lot of people or a lot of customers, they don't always view cheaper as certainly not better, right? Sometimes you see something that's 5 times as much. If they can afford that, they're going to say, all right, this is worth what I'm paying. It's certainly different than when you're looking at something that's like 50 times as much. But I think the biggest mistake I see a lot of founders make when it comes to profit and margin specifically is undervaluing their product too much, where, it's something that you're going to have to live and learn. You see the patterns and behaviors of how customers are using your product or purchasing, whatever that looks like. And if retention is strong and the product is delivering value over what people are paying, that's where the pricing then comes into play. And you can understand, hey, not just from there's 20 competitors out there that are all charging, $100 a month. Doesn't mean you have to charge, 99 or whatever, but you can kind of play in the fair market space there based on the value your customers are getting.
There's so much temptation for people to try to be the low cost offer on the market. I don't know of a founder who hasn't gone through that thought process of, oh, I got to be cheaper. Like, well, the problem with being cheap is that sometimes you risk scalability on the back end. Let me ask you this question. Knowing that a solopreneur is going to turn into a business that eventually scales and hires lots of people, what's the minimum profit margin you want to see from a solopreneur founder today so that they have room to scale in the future?
It definitely varies based on the industry. I think for software specifically, that's kind of been always like software has always generally had a lot better margins when it comes to, not just SaaS, but from anything and of like upwards of like 50, 60, 70%. Very different than retail. We're not talking necessarily restaurants or things like that, which are obviously with everything going on and ingredients have always kind of had trouble there. But I even look at escape rooms, and just a lot of other retail, a lot of, whether you're CPG, whether you're hardware, in general, I think kind of having and looking at the M&A side and then what you look towards with an exit, having room to be able to continuously, again, and maybe that's headcount, maybe that's product development. So I do think it's a range, but I've seen anywhere software as high as, 60, 70%. All the way to physical goods and things, anywhere between, even 30, 40%. But just knowing kind of to the end way to answer your question is like, what is the end goal, whether you're rolling out different product features or completely different physical products, those tend to kind of help understand how much margin there is and how much room there is to adjust that.
Yeah, and for someone listening to this podcast who's the aspiring 9-to-5er, wants to own a business, still has a day job today, one thing that I find that they need to understand more is there's always these hidden costs, the ones you don't see coming, that you can plan for some, but if you don't have any flexibility in there, talk to me from your experience in your own businesses or other founders about the hidden costs that you never see coming, that you have to plan ahead for.
Yeah, and I mean, the hidden costs could be so many things, not just the financial hidden costs, of course, but I think for me it was the time, and then of course I'll talk about the financial in a second. But my first venture, and I got started later. I talked to a lot of founders who got involved, who are getting started in high school and college and doing this in their like teen years. For me, my first business wasn't until 25, and I was able to, for me, it was no kids at the point, right? Just had started seeing my partner at that time, and she was very understanding of the 18-hour days in many cases, right? Especially for the escape rooms. I remember like me and my 2 co-founders going to like pick up this couch at like 3 a.m. And then like it wouldn't fit in the car, so we drove like a mile with like the trunk open and like the couch outside, like hanging outside the car, and like making sure like just like these funny things that you can do when you get started, like you do whatever it takes to make it happen. And that I think to me was the hidden cost, was like knowing, and I was still working a full-time job then too. So I was working, 9 to 5 in many cases, past 5 because I was in a management role. So it would be this 9 to 5, 9 to 6 hours, and then grab food on the way to the space and work from 6 to midnight or 6 to 1, 2 a.m. and kind of rinse and repeat. So I think the hidden cost was like, just how much that really took. And then of course the financial side of it, from just things that, like, I remember our first physical location, we didn't realize, like, for retail or for this, like, entertainment based retail, you had to be like 100 yards away from the school for something. And so we like signed the lease, and then the permit didn't go through. So we lost, like, before we even made $1 of revenue, we lost like 3 months of runway and rent. And we're like, man, are we just not built for this? Should we just start over and do something else? But yeah, there's always going to be inevitably the best case scenario to business. There will be some things that go wrong from, anything like that. So it's mostly time. And then definitely I always kind of budget, like, whatever they tell you, whether it's a franchise, whether it's whatever, always add in like an extra 25, 30% there for, like, a backup fund or a rainy day fund.
I want to hone in on one of the most impactful things that you just said. You breezed past it. I think it's a really big point people need to pay attention to. You still had a 9 to 5 as you were getting your startup off the ground. You kept the day job. I talk to so many people, Brian, who tell me, as soon as I have enough of 6 months expenses, 12 months expenses, I'm going to go take the leap. And I go, why are you taking a leap in 2026? That doesn't make any sense to take a leap. Why don't you get more creative to find a way to keep your day job so that your new business doesn't have to make money? It's hard enough as it is to have to make money to support you on day one and not be pulling from your emergency fund. You kept your day job. Was that just wisdom that you already had, that you knew to do that? Or was it just pragmatism?
And that's a great point, Steve, because at the end of the day, like, I'll admit, right, of course, if I had done only, and the escape room, right, to only Roamly or just those ventures, like, sure, I think that the startup would have grown a lot faster, or I think that the companies would have grown faster. And we were just lucky where we did find early success. I know that's not the case for most business owners. And for me, it was kind of I was always an aspiring 9 to 5er, like my parents had very phenomenal careers, right? 30, 40 years of the same company, from like Kraft to IBM, their whole careers. And that's very rare that you see nowadays, especially not just for like younger generations, but in general. And so for me, like, that was the generally the American dream, right? And you climb the ladder. And so me starting the business was not because I like hated working for people, right? Or didn't want to like work for the man. Because like at the end of the day, I worked with a lot of phenomenal people. The work was generally pretty rewarding, and I was learning a lot. So I think for me, the end of the day was like, as long as you feel like you can still deliver 100% to whatever your day job is, right? And because at the end of the day, yeah, that's what's putting food on the table. Most founders don't get to pay themselves, if anything, a fraction of what they made working a 9 to 5 until months, years down the line. And it is a privilege to be able to be a founder and say, hey, I'm not going to potentially make any money for 6 months and just follow the dream. So like, not just in today's economy, but in any economy, making sure you have some, at the end of the day, you're not going to be successful if you're stressed about money, if you're stressed about your mortgage, your rent, putting food on the table, right? Make sure everything is good on the financial front, on the home front. If that means your business is going to grow slower, or it's going to take 4 months to get the doors open versus 2 months, that's always going to be my advice, right? As like a very pragmatic bootstrapper and like always pro bootstrapper, I always kind of advocate, find the balance there as long as you can.
Let's move on and talk about distribution. I think so many first-time founders miss the idea of distribution. It's all about the product. It's all about making it the great user experience, the Steve Jobs, the distribution and getting customers to buy it, finding a bunch of customers all in the same location. That'll take care of itself if the product is perfect. And sometimes in unicorns, that is the case. It is that cool where the product literally sells itself. But I find that that's probably the exception and not the rule. Mm-hmm. And so the rule being that distribution is important. And I define distribution in a base way as, is there a pool of people that already want to buy your product that are all in one location that you can go to, or someone is gatekeeping them, whether it's a platform or whether it's a group or a community, or it's someone that you can sell to who sells to somebody else? I think about your experience when it comes to both the physical and then the technology side of the house. On the physical side, you tell me, is distribution location Yelp? What distribution for a physical brick and mortar business?
There's so much. I think it's it sucks when it comes to like so much of its reviews where like, yes, we've been very lucky that we've had good reviews, but like in today's age of like review bombing and all this kind of stuff, like, a bad Yelp, a bad Google, like you go viral on TikTok or something for the wrong reasons, like that's gonna, that. And of course, you need to do something wrong to go viral in a bad way for that. But at the end of the day, yeah, distribution and when it comes to retail, I think just comes to we were lucky, like a lot of it was very grassroots. It was very referral driven. It was, can you create such a good, whether it was product-led growth in software or product-led growth in a restaurant or a escape room, right? Brick and mortar and experiential retail. Can you create something so good that people want to tell their friends about it? They want to go. I'm sure if you think of the last, maybe great dinner you went to and you said, oh, that steak was phenomenal. This was great. You probably told your friends or whatever. Like people want to tell their friends and people about exciting things they did. And so to me, there's no better distribution channel than that. And it's tough when you are building something early. And in many ways, it's just an MVP and you've got your name on it and you're kind of nervous to put it out there and be associated with something that you feel is not, 120%. But in reality, if you're truly solving a problem and a need to have, people will use a much lesser version of it, knowing that it's going to improve because it solved something they need. So I think for me, distribution always comes back to, is the product that good or is your service that good where people want to tell people about it because of how it made them feel and the experience they had.
With that in mind, what's the obvious mistake that most founders make when it comes to distribution?
That's a good one because I think there's, like you said earlier, there's so many obvious mistakes when it comes to product or different things. Distribution and go-to-market's tough because the tough part is that there are so many channels you can go to market with, and sometimes it's referrals, right? There's cold email, there's cold LinkedIn, there's like ads, there's performance marketing, there's like content marketing, there's like so many types of things. And the biggest mistake I see founders do is they try to do all of it a little bit. So they try to do, hey, there's like a dozen ways that we can go to market. Let's just spend a few hours a week doing all of them. And of course, it's important to A/B test. You want to make sure you figure out what's working and then double down on it. But you just physically can't, unless you've got a team of like 20 co-founders or you're venture backed and you've got like money to spend and test these things out. Like most founders realistically are probably only going to be able to try maybe 3 or 4 at a time, especially if they have a team. If they're solo founders, maybe it's just 1 or 2. Because then you have to talk to customers, build the product, do everything else that's in line. So I think the biggest thing is always find maybe 2 or 3 different channels for distribution that you can test. Maybe it's referrals, maybe it's some type of outbound, maybe it's some type of inbound. And then test that. And then eventually you will find other ways to try to extend the moat, but do that batch it at a time. Don't just try to do everything at once, because you'll end up in this master of none scenario where you might have not done anything fully right, and you might just rule something out when in reality that could have been your best channel had you put in the full effort into it.
It's a great segue into our last category of customer acquisition. And I argue for bootstrapping companies, profitable customer acquisition is so important for them to figure out and have a plan in place of how they can predictably acquire customers profitably. Although it goes along with distribution, I want to bring back in something you brought up earlier, where you're talking about educating a new market, specifically on the escape rooms. Nobody in America had seen an escape room before. You go overseas, you see it. Now, you not only have to go and build this, but you have to get the first people in the door to come in and find a way to let people know that you exist, because you can have the best product in the world. You can even have distribution figured out where you have, hey, all of my customers are on this blog. But if you can't find a way to pay the person that owns that blog to let you position it in a way that you make money from it on day one, it's hard to bootstrap when it's going downhill and you're losing money every single day. Talk to me about profitable customer acquisition, and specifically, what did you guys do with the escape room to make money and have that early success?
Good question, because I think at the end of the day, a lot of people just think, hey, I'm just going to put money into ads, or I'm just going to go, like, the more people see my brand, the more that they'll just give it a shot and explore. And in reality, it's never been harder than ever, even with more as many channels as there are, from every social media app under the sun to like YouTube TV to cable to radio. Like, it's nothing new. We've always been surrounded by ads and by content. But like you said, a lot of people go, or I think a lot of founders go too quickly into, all right, I'm just going to, I've got some money. Let me just throw $500 this month into these ads and see what sticks, without fully understanding what their customer acquisition cost is, what their LTV is, and a lot of these terms that is tough to figure out early on because you don't have a lot of data to support it. But really fine tuning and digging into that piece, because now Meta and all these platforms are very good, honestly, at sharing analytics from your Google AdWords to whatnot. And so the biggest thing that we did at least at the escape rooms was just finding the channel that worked the most. We kind of did this. We sprinkled, from performance marketing to, honestly, we printed out a bunch of flyers and just went in people's mailboxes, with discount codes. Like, hey, we just opened, here's a free ticket to XYZ. Like a lot of grassroots stuff that of course works with a physical location versus large scale software. But at the end of the day, yes, it was just knowing the numbers. So that way, so many times, like a big escape room thing that we talk about in the industry, it's like so many people, like you might get an ad, and I'm sure it's not exclusive to escape rooms. You might get an ad for a restaurant in like Maine, but you live in Vegas, or like an escape room ad might pop up for someone living in Miami that's in like North Dakota. And a lot of people just dump money into ads without really looking into, is this hitting the right customer segment? Is this hitting the right market location? And so don't just put money into something and kind of set it and forget it. Really analyze it. And that's what we did, is looking like, hey, the first $50 even that we put into this like week-long campaign, who resonated? Was it male versus female? Was it this age demographic versus this economic background, right? Like look at every little piece, and then know that that's also not going to stay the same. That's also going to evolve. So it's never just this one thing that once you crack it, it stays. It's like this kind of evergreen, always living thing that you have to track. And that's what it took us a little bit longer to get it. But once we did that, that's what we've been doing the past 10 years.
Alex Hormozy says that he who can pay the most for the customer is going to be the one that wins the customer. And I think that's true when it comes to paid. But the first mover in the category, the first person to start either making ads or acquiring customers in unique and interesting ways, tends to acquire those customers the cheapest. It was no different for me when I was starting to do Amazon ads in 2017 for a product where we were acquiring customers at really, every dollar we spent, we made $10 in revenue on a 50% margin product. It was unbelievable. You couldn't do that today because it's fully inundated. And I talk to investors here in Las Vegas, especially on the venture side, and they talk about direct to consumer and talk about these launch strategies. Everyone saw the Dollar Shave Club strategy and everybody copied it with the ads, and they're going all in on this strategy that worked for one company, high profile, and then everyone else saturated it, and now it doesn't work for anybody. And that tends to be the flow with these companies. My question to you is, how much do you value as a founder, and now as someone who's working with founders, as an investor, how much do you value being early?
A lot less now than before, but I think it's still equally important.
Break that
Because
down for me.
yeah, so being early in one way or the other, right? You're gonna if it's truly a problem that's a need to have, then you're gonna acquire the customers. You're gonna find that people, hey, I did not know about this. I've been doing this very antiquated way or this way for the past however many years. Wow, this really saved me. This is much better. So being early is important, but at the end of the day, there's going to be, if it's truly a need to have, there's going to be competition coming out. There's going to be other things out there that maybe was hindered by a lack of access to technology and how to build it, or a lack of, maybe it's algorithmic with machine learning and AI, whatever that may be. If it's a truly a need to have, there's going to be alternatives out there. And if your product or solution is truly the only thing in market and you're successful, please prove me wrong. But then probably the market's not big enough. It's going to be a lifestyle business, which is completely fine, right? Lifestyle businesses are phenomenal, but it's just the level of what you can grow and expand to will be hindered at some point. And so, sorry to kind of take the long-winded answer back to your question there, but when it comes to what does that really look like for being first and being early, it's more about being right. And to me, so many founders, I get it. I'm still am very impatient and still trying to learn and work on that. I think a lot of founders say like, oh, like I need to build this now and I need to put this out immediately. there's two extremes. There's rushing into it, and then there's waiting too long to make it perfect. And I'm gonna, before I even show a customer, I need this feature to be there, and I need it to look like this, and all of that. There's a fine middle ground where I think that that's where everyone should be playing. And you wait too long, you're gonna get beat to market by 50 other competitors if it's a need to have. If you go too early and the product's terrible, you're gonna churn, you're gonna get bad reviews, whatever's gonna happen, and you're gonna miss out. So that's going to be the biggest piece, is like, be early if you're confident in your product, take the time to talk, to do customer interviews, stress test everything, and make sure and find that middle ground, because at the end of the day, being early is only going to be so good if people stick with you.
Okay, that covers product, margin, distribution, and customer acquisition. You insinuated earlier that there was a fifth category that causes businesses to fail. What is that category?
It is team. So the thing that I see almost second next to product market fit is lack of team cohesion or team fit. And so if you're lucky enough to be a solopreneur, then hey, you're good. You don't have to worry as much about that. But I've been lucky to have and blessed to have really phenomenal co-founders over the years, from all ventures, from the escape rooms to my software. I've had like public storage and self-storage companies, to like literally just every random project that I've just been lucky to have really great co-founders. And it's never been daisies and kind of sunshine, of course, the whole way. But I think you just need to be, I talk to so many founders that, especially in tech, but it could be anything. You're at a happy hour, you're at a networking event or just something, and you're just vibing with someone. You're probably got a few drinks in you, whatever. It's like, yeah, we should build this thing. Like, let's do it. Like, everyone gets super excited. The next day, you just start, let's go 50-50. Here's the equity, blah, blah, blah. Like, and boom, and they're off to the races. And when in reality, that's the most difficult thing, because we're not going to pay ourselves for 6 months. I'm going to be working 80 hours a week on this. Are you going to be able to work 80 hours a week? Everyone's got a different scenario. And so we see a lot of times founding teams either build resentment for one another, or they rush into things without actually taking the time to understand, what is that 3-year goal? Do we both want to exit this? Does someone want to do this for the next 30 years when in reality someone just wanted kind of a quick flip or a quick win? And so to me, the lack of team cohesion and making sure that teams have the end goal in place even before they start is the most important thing. And like, typically what I see is the number 2 reason that companies fail, both from small scale brick and mortar all the way up to large software and everything like that.
So what's the secret to business partners that get along in the long term? Is it that early communication and aligning of incentives?
I think so. I think the biggest thing, like, I've been lucky where people always say, don't do business with friends or family and things like that. But I think it is important that you do that, because it's very easy. You have so many matching apps. I remember I met, I've been lucky again, where I met a business partner or a connection through, it was like this app called Shaper, which I don't think exists anymore, but it was like a Tinder for like business profiles. You would like see someone's profile, they're building XYZ, you swipe left to right. But at the end of the day, like, my best friend from high school, and we're still best friends today for the past 20 years, it's just because we have a business disagreement or because things get difficult, it's so much easier to throw that relationship away if it's a stranger you met like a few months ago and you met at a bar or at an event, and like, if the business breaks up and we never talk to each other, hey, that's no big deal. But you're not going to do that people do, but it's less likely to happen with a good friend, with a family member, with a coworker you've known for years, where you've already established that trust. And so that is one important thing. But also with Gilder, my 2 co-founders and I, we had never met in person until 2 years into starting Gilder. We had only known each other remotely. We had never, I consider myself squarely millennial. I'm 36 years old. My co-founder, Michael, he's 68. My other co-founder, Tiger, is 29. Very different. We joke that Michael sold his first company before Tiger was even born. And, we all have these different goals for where we want the business to be, or like for what we want personally with us. But we know that it all drives the same business end goal. And that's what's worked out well, even though we've never met each other in person before starting the company, versus my best friend, where we've known each other for 20 years and then we started the company. But those are kind of the extremes. You're lucky if you can get both sides. But I always say, work with someone that and you take the time to spend that time communicating the end goal before you even start.
Can a business team work without having an established final decision maker?
I don't think so. I'll be honest. Yes, of course, if you get to a stage where you have a board and a lot of that is also managed outside of the direct CEO and that team. And I've always traditionally all my ventures, we've always been co-founders, whether it's an S corp or an LLC. Like we've always been traditionally evenly split and always generally had evenly say. But at the end of the day, there kind of needs to be one person that whether it's like a hard line, whatever person X says goes, or whether they happen to be the most convincing, where they do the most research and they do everything, they take the time to do that. There needs to be, I think, typically one person like that leading the charge, or you just have to have such a good dynamic. If it's like a two-person team, the more people you add into it, the sloppier it gets. So I think you don't need necessarily a core single decision maker if it's like a two-person team or a three-person team. But as you get bigger, there absolutely, I suggest, should have one at least doing that.
I also noticed that when companies get past that $1 million valuation and the numbers become real to people, that the split of vision of where the company should go really starts to play an effect. And then the resentment starts to build up of whoever took de facto control of, we're supposed to be 50-50 partners, and you're making all these decisions, taking the company this direction, and I want it to go that direction. You see these things play out once there's real value created. And I wonder if there's a secret sauce to founders getting along once the real value has been created, the majority of the work has been done. And now, do we get a little bit bored where there's less work to do and we get to start fighting over the money? Do you see that play out when it gets to higher valuations?
And yeah, and absolutely. It's a good problem to have, of course, for those of you that are lucky to get there, hats off to you. And I think that the struggles, of course, if you can get through the part of slogging through, 50, 60, 70, 80 hour weeks, and for no money, and then of course I pray that it doesn't happen to you where you get to the point of $1 million valuations and then letting the company kind of go down a different path or implode. But that's where it's like having these kind of ironclad, you can, which I know a lot of people don't like spending money on attorneys or lawyers early on before they get it, but I do think there's some things that are non-negotiables that has to happen before you do that. Making sure like, hey, are there buyout clauses? What happens for if someone wants to walk away, does the other founders get first right of refusal to buy the equity or the shares? Does it get, what happens there? And I think having that going into it helps save a lot of headaches and a lot higher attorney costs down the line once the valuation pushes, 7-8 figures. And so I think that's where exactly it, making sure that as these inevitable paths will diverge at some point, even if off day one, everyone says, hey, I'm in this for the long haul. I want to build this for 10 years to a 8-9 figure business, whatever that is, like that's the goal. A few years in, if you're having a lot of success and someone says, I wouldn't mind going to sit on a beach somewhere and not working anymore. As long as you have that exit plan in place for each person or for the team, that helps rein in a lot of headaches, because I definitely have seen a lot of resentment from founders that I spoke with. Hey, I'm working 80 hours a week and I'm 50% versus my co-founder who's working 20 hours a week, and like, why am I busting my ass for the same thing as this person when our goals changed and I have no recourse against him other than like just trying to talk to him? So I think that the sooner you can button all of that out, the more headaches it'll save you once you get that 7-figure valuation.
It's crazy because on one hand, you say, if the business isn't going to turn into anything, we're wasting a lot of our time by going through all these conversations about, hey, when can I retire one day? And what's going to look like 5 years from now? We're making millions of dollars. On the other hand, if you don't have those conversations and you don't have expectation management of what your other founding members want, what your business partners want, and what they think is reasonable for them to take a step back or to go on a 3-month vacation, and someone's working harder than somebody else, or somebody's personal finances causes them to ask for distributions or dividends when other people don't actually need it. How are those things going to be handled? I see it with successful businesses. Again, good problems to have, but successful businesses have problems too, because that's when all the conflict, that's when the lawyers get brought in, and that's when you start mediating solutions.
100%. And it's never going to be like, maybe some scenarios, but it's never this beautiful 50-50 kumbaya, like beautiful split of responsibility and time. Someone's always inevitably doing more or putting more in or carrying more or whatever. And I think the best founders understand, like, you just have to roll with it. If one person always feels like that's the case, sure, something's going to happen. But at the end of the day, it's just, you just got to roll with the punches. Things are never going to be this perfect, beautiful start plan from A to Z. And so the best founders are the ones that know how to fight through that, know how to be communicative with their co-founder and with their partners, and just address it sooner than later. The longer people wait, the longer the bigger these headaches become. So everything you said, absolutely agree with.
There's some unconventional wisdom out there that says that nobody makes a $10 million or more exit without screwing some people over. Agree or disagree?
From someone that's not, so I've not had a $10 million exit, so I won't speak to that from personal experience, but from exits in general, whether it's venture backed or whether it's bootstrapped, at the end of the day, there's always someone that the question always comes up: why are you selling? Why are you looking to get out? And of course, the person's fishing. Oh, because no one's going to say because the business is going downhill or it's terrible or whatever. So there's always some spin to it. And I think when it comes to any buy sell scenario, there are ways that they're for whatever reasons, it can work out very very fruitful for both parties. So I'm gonna, without having experienced that directly myself, I'm gonna say false. There are ways to kind of exit and sell without screwing someone over, but there's a lot of things that do go wrong in business or things that happen. So always practice due diligence and make sure that the books are the books. There's a lot of ways to go around it these days, and so making sure you're protected is, whether you're a buyer and a seller, always first thing that I will suggest.
Well, and I will also add to that in closing, being screwed over is a very relative term. From the person exiting who says, I didn't screw anybody over, to those who feel screwed over, that's all based off your perception. And both things can be true at the same time in people's reality. Brian, really cool conversation today. I know it's going to be helpful to a lot of people. The aspiring 9-to-5er wants to start a business and is looking to learn some of the things to avoid. And you gave us that on 5 different categories today, from product, margin, distribution, customer acquisition, and you added the bonus of team, which I loved on there as well. Where can people find you if they want to get in contact with you?
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed the conversation. Great questions and conversation. I think the biggest thing for me is LinkedIn's always easiest. Feel free to reach out, send me a message. Very much OCD about all that, so I always try to respond right away and get in front. So any questions, conversation. At the end of the day, being a founder is one of the most rewarding, stressful, but fun things I think we can do. And so, and it's Steve, right, from talking to a lot of your other guests and the work that you do, like, founders are so passionate, it just makes things easy to talk about. And so connect with me on LinkedIn. You can learn more at gilder.com or see my profile there, and happy to chat, but always available. And this is the fun stuff that keeps the energy going each day.
Awesome. We'll get all that in the show notes. So if you want to find Brian Lee and get in contact, learn more about Gilder, you can do just that. This has been another great episode. Brian, you laid down some knowledge and wisdom for us today. So thank you for being a part of Rolle with Steve.
Thanks again, Steve. Appreciate it.